Welcome to the Voice of Retail for the week of October 14th, 2019. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada and sponsored by Atomic Reach. Atomic Reach offers Atomic AI, the world's leading smart content platform. By optimizing product descriptions and marketing content to match shoppers' reading and emotional preferences, they deliver sales conversions and improvement and personalization at scale. In this week's episode, right on the heels of the first Cannaversary of the legalization of recreational cannabis in Canada and the launch of cannabis retail, and with the new Cannabis Edible 2.0 regime coming into force, 3 exclusive interviews from Vancouver at this week's Retail Council of Canada Retail West event with cannabis retailers and regulatory experts right as they came off the main stage. First up is Eleanor Lynch, Senior Vice President of Retail Operations at Kiaro. We reflect together on the year that was and learn about Kiaro's interesting approach to in-store and brand design. Next up, Adam Coates, Chief Commercial Officer Westleaf, takes us through their unique retail concept, Prairie Records, how they approach developing the brand, and how 2.0 and the new edibles regime will allow retailers to introduce product that will bring in the canna-curious customers who are looking for alternatives to what is available at retail today. Finally, RCC's Avery Bunges, Policy Analyst, Government Relations and Regulatory Affairs, weighs in with her perspectives around government regulatory framework informed by years of dealing with multiple files and issues. Lastly, I'll take a look at the retail news of the week, but first, let's listen to my interview with Eleanor Lynch. Eleanor, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. We're here in Vancouver at Retail Council of Canada's Retail West in the Atomic Reach podcasting studio. That's a long introduction, but welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's a real treat to have the opportunity to chit and chat today with you. But why don't we start? Tell my listeners about your personal professional journey, what you do at Kiaro, and then we'll talk about Kiaro as a retailer.
Sounds great. Well, I had a kind of interesting journey to retail. I started out as a teacher, actually. I was going to be a teacher, and then took a break from teaching and went back into retail and just never left. I found out that you could teach without a lot of red tape. Right. And so what a great experience. Right. And so worked my way up through the retail field and loved every part of it. Worked for a long time in the sporting industry. Mm-hmm. And it's quite a different change going from sports to cannabis. Sure. But I was approached by a really great colleague of mine, and they'd introduced the idea. And got this great opportunity to work in the cannabis field, bringing retail to life. Well, it's interesting
with your educational background. Education is such an important part overall of the culture of retail in the cannabis space. So I can see a real a connection there. Tell me about Kiaro. Tell me about your Kiaro as a retailer, where your stores are, and how you go to market.
Yeah, so Kiaro is a wonderful brand built by one of the co-founders of Aurora. So he had, this great idea of bringing retail, and he wanted to make sure that it was very experiential. And so found a lot of like-minded people from both sides of the spectrum, meaning those that were working in cannabis and really interested in cannabis, and those that came from professional retailing backgrounds. And so I just really admire the way that we brought together these two groups of people, and that is where Kiaro, the brand, was born. Through a lot of workshops and working with a great brand developer, we came out with this great brand Kiaro, which comes from the Italian word chiaroscuro, which means from darkness into light, which is a wonderful allusion to the evolution of cannabis. Sure. And there's just so many wonderful people that have given me this great opportunity. And so we really have tried to live that through the brand and through the message.
Well, let's talk about your brand a bit. I was in your store in Vancouver. Beautiful store. Really liked the experience. Great people. I liked the process of ordering. I liked everything about the process. I liked the terpenes, how you'd laid those out, and you could get a sense of the entourage effect if you think that way, and just get I thought it was a more richer experience compared to some of the other ways you can go to market. That's the Vancouver store, but you've also got stores in Saskatchewan. So I wanted to understand how you see the stores, how you lay them out, and what the vision is behind your retail and how you express that in retail.
The team, thank you very much. I would encourage everyone to check it out. It's a wonderful experience, and there's a lot of great experiences out there. So really we tried to approach it from the perspective of how does a consumer, how do they want to interact with cannabis? Not what are the restrictions or the regulations, but what is the best way to interact? And we really wanted an open format. We really wanted it to be about conversation. We really wanted to bring terpenes into the conversation because they're a key component of understanding how cannabis may work with your
versus
experiences
strains
versus strains, exactly. So we really approached it with a team effort. We brought a lot of people together. We did a lot of workshops and focused on, ease of the experience, education and how that would work, and then we layered in the regulations. And so we wanted to create this experience
I see.
where
so
you're not...
You started from the experience and worked out to
That's
the
right.
regulations versus regulations and worked out.
That's right. And I really do think that is what has created this wonderful... more integrated experience with cannabis, and it's created a lot of positivity for the staff, because the staff were a key component of what we built into the retail design. So for us, it was so important. How would the staff feel about this regulation being interpreted this way? Would this make it more difficult to talk about cannabis, or would they talk about keys or unlocking cabinets? So these were
there's a lot of process behind running a cannabis store.
There is.
Right?
There's a lot more than a lot of people maybe realize. We didn't want that to impede the experience.
Again, build it from the experience first out.
Especially for the employee. How do we make them have a great experience as well? Because they're the key component of the interaction. So, and from there, we just layered in technology. I think technology is key because there are so many regulations, and in a lot of provinces, you do have to keep everything stored in the back. And
I like the touchscreen experience.
That?
I like that experience. And then I had a guided touchscreen experience, so kind of a little bit of best of both worlds. But of course, to be fair, I wanted to see how
it would work.
The associate interacted with the customers, but I could easily have figured it out myself. That's for sure.
Yeah,
and then,
that's great.
Up on the order number up on the screen, so it was well done.
Yeah, good. Well, that's great. And our stores in Saskatchewan, we have two, Saskatoon and La Ronge. And so those would be our original concept ideas. And so our customer journey there is the most maybe clean version of what we were trying to bring to life. With the one in Vancouver, we really wanted to reuse and recycle what was already there. It was a pre-existing location prior to our involvement.
So a retrofit is what we would call
Exactly.
it in the retail space. Right?
Exactly. And in this day and age where everyone is trying to do their best for the environment, it was really key. Reuse and recycle what was there and try and build a design in and around that really replicated the Kiaro experience. So I'm really proud of what the team did. They did a great job.
So we're on the cusp of, or just past, the first anniversary of recreational cannabis legalization. Yes. We're heading into 2.0. What's your observations on the year that was, and then more importantly, the year and time ahead? I mean, edibles will be on your shelves probably late this year, maybe early next. How are you guys thinking about all that?
Well, in a year in reflection, it's really about companies doing their best to get up and running, and that was a real challenge, interpreting regulation, getting staff, that whole bit. So I think everyone's really tired. We're all really tired. But we're super excited about adding 50% more product to market. And I think that it's going to be a challenge if consumers are expecting to walk into stores late this year and see a really great representation of this new the new categories that are coming online. I think, hold your expectations. I would imagine by the end of the first quarter next year, you'll have a great opportunity to see those new products on shelf. And
it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time.
Exactly. I mean, these producers really have to get everything through the supply chain, the logistics.
Yep.
Some are working with central distributors and some are not. So it's a real feat after a very long year of standing up retail.
Yeah, it's not like you've been sitting around just waiting for more work to happen and more legislation to be compliant and more planogramming to do, right?
Exactly.
So what lies ahead for Kiaro? You've got 3 locations today. Plans for more, plans for expanding the assortment, obviously.
Yes, we are very excited to be bringing stores to communities in British Columbia. Right now we have 4 that we're working on with the LCRB for licensing and 4 different municipalities. So very excited about bringing 4 more stores, hopefully by the end of the second quarter. If we're really lucky, end of first quarter. So that's really where our focus is at the moment. Delivery is a great experience in the Saskatchewan market. So we're really trying to find ways for getting product to consumers in a safe manner.
Yeah, unpack that for us a little bit more, because Saskatchewan's pretty unique in Canada around home delivery. Tell us about how it works in Saskatchewan.
So Saskatchewan has done a great job. I really hats off to the Saskatchewan folks at the SLGA, because they've really created a framework that's pretty vertical. So as a retailer, a producer, a wholesaler, delivery, there's lots of different options for licensing, and there's no real restrictions between what you can hold in terms of multiple licenses. And so really what they've done is they've created a booming economy in Saskatchewan, a lot of great ideas coming out of Saskatchewan, whether it's micro or whether it's services like delivery.
Right.
And so we partner right now with Pineapple Express and Parcel Pal for delivery to consumers within Saskatchewan.
Is that popular?
Yeah, for sure. It's growing in popularity. But when it comes to getting cannabis in a cold climate, it's a no-brainer.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it also is such an important component of competing with your real competitors, which is the legacy market.
Yes, that is.
It's an important contribution to that.
Yes.
The overall competitive.
Yes, I think that
toolkit, right?
That market is definitely had a great year. They boomed in the first year because we were getting retail to market.
Yep.
Cannabis became legal, and so that's been a real challenge.
Interesting. Well, I think we're all happy that, by and large, supply issues are starting to resolve themselves. And I guess from your perspective, it's getting the right product on the shelves. Now, it's not just any product you can get, but the right mix of product and what consumers are looking for. So,
yeah, I think that the consumers are opening up to what cannabis could be for them. And I just encourage consumers to go in and try a different store. Try more than one, because you might not have a great experience the first time.
Yeah.
So definitely try Kiaro, Kingsway, and Clark.
For those in Vancouver,
Yes,
Kingsway and Clark, yeah.
So definitely come out and try us. But try, it's because that's really what we're talking about is exposing people to there's multiple experiences with cannabis, and so really trying to destigmatize it is important.
Well, listen, thanks so much for taking time
Thank you for
to speak
having
with me on the Voice of Retail, the Voice of Retail podcast here in the Atomic Reach podcasting studio, and I wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate it.
Adam, welcome to the Voice of Retail. We're here at Retail West in Vancouver in the Atomic Reach podcasting studio. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Why don't we jump right in
Sure.
and tell us a little bit about yourself, your professional, personal journey,
Sure.
And Westleaf and the brand, and let's kick it off there.
A lot to unpack there. So born and raised in Winnipeg, so a good prairie boy. And then right starting my career after I went to the University of Western Ontario, I started with Labatt Breweries of Canada in their global management trainee program. And the reason I bring that up is because it was a really amazing place to start my career, especially as doing what I do now. The program actually started out where you basically learn the business for 6 months. So you spend time in breweries, in sales offices, in logistics offices, marketing, the whole back end, and you really learn the business from top to bottom. And then you're placed into your first role. And I would always.
And it really is going to school on brand and channel and
the whole thing, everything
elements,
from bringing in the malted barley into the brewery and then getting a consumer to buy it off the store shelf. And so really learning kind of soup to nuts how not only produce products work, but also how retail works. And as any good marketer or commercial kind of executive, I believe that you need to start in sales. That's where you learn retail. That's how you learn how to engage with consumers and create environments where people will actually buy your products and how they connect with them. So I started off as a sales rep actually right here in BC. My territory was Langley, Mission, and Abbotsford, and then I progressed through that organization fairly quickly. I did 7 jobs, lived in 5 different cities in just under 8 years, and really what's relevant to just transitioning over to the cannabis space, which I did in 2017, is I did 2 jobs in Toronto that are very topical in cannabis. One is I worked on in a business integration role for 2 acquisitions that we did. So the Mark Anthony brands and the Mill Street Brewery, and in cannabis, as you know, it's rife with M&A and capital markets, and so understanding how to bring companies together, bring businesses together, and evaluate them was incredibly important. And then great for me to understand how to learn and grow brands across a nation. And then my second, or my last role there, and second in Toronto, was this VP of Specialty Sales. And what this was it was a sales role and division that was specifically structured to impact all the locations in places where it was really hard for beer to compete, especially big beer. So think about craft beer bars, fine dining, nightclubs, all those kind of places where they're really impactful from a brand perspective, but really hard for a larger company to get into. And so that's where I had to learn how to think about white space opportunities, both from a product standpoint, but also connecting with the consumer.
And from a commercial standpoint,
exactly.
And the consumer's
and so,
lens, right?
A bit of long-winded, but it's just to say that it was thinking about how do you do things differently at the point of connection with the consumer, so where they're actually purchasing it, to bring either your category more forward or your brands more forward. And so, after a great run at Labatt, I, have entrepreneurship in my kind of blood, and I really wanted to kind of strike out on my own in some way and do something more entrepreneurial and create something new. And so, the cannabis industry was calling. It was, 2017. It was very hot at the time, and
a lot of correlations in from a couple of industries really attract and are attractive,
absolutely,
to people, and the beer and spirits industry.
Yeah, there's really no question. Now, I will say that there's a lot of great things that come from the beverage alcohol industry that cannabis can be useful for. But what I do caution is that cannabis and alcohol are very different in a lot of ways. While they do overlap in some occasions and need segments, cannabis goes far beyond where alcohol is going to be used. When you think about health and wellness, where you think about some nutraceutical sort of uses, and then of course the recreational, but it is different and needs to be sold different. It's a very different product. And so I started with Westleaf in early 2018. I was the first employee in the door, and what we're trying to do at Westleaf
from oats and barley to seed to sale.
Exactly.
I see the parallels.
And so, as kind of the first employee at Westleaf, what we're really trying to do is figure out a way to how to grow brands in this industry. So we've got a production platform, an extraction facility which was just licensed by Health Canada last Friday, which we announced on Tuesday, and that's a big deal as we get into Cannabis 2.0. That facility is going to be laser focused on producing all the derivative products. So whether that's a vape pen, a concentrate, an edible, potentially beverages. We're also doing some contract manufacturing out of that for other kind of LPs and producers who don't have that capability.
Smart.
And then really, getting to the retail part of it is we knew that we had a production platform. We also knew it was going to be really hard to grow brands given the regulations that are around marketing.
Yeah.
And so owning retail and having that consumer feedback loop was going to be incredibly important. We like the cannabis retail business as a standalone business, but we like it even more in the context of being able to understand what the consumer is demanding, what they're looking for, how they're shopping, and then be able to tune our produced products to fall in line with some of the trends and the demands of consumers.
Tell us a little bit, I want to get back to your point around 2.0. It's
Sure.
kind of an auspicious time, but tell us a little bit about how you go to retail, how Westleaf expresses itself in retail, because it's really unique and it's really fabulous.
Sure, and so one of my first tasks when I joined Westleaf was, what's our retail concept? And the first thing I said, well, it's not going to be called Westleaf. We need to be something different. There's too many leafs in the space. Yeah. There's really a sea of sameness. And so when we were looking at this thing in early 2018, we saw a few kind of designs and mock-ups of what, other competitors were going to be doing. Lots of Apple Store-inspired concepts, but nothing that really spoke to the education that's required, creating a space that was going to bring canna-curious or those who don't consume cannabis into the space and feel comfortable. And so what we did is we created a concept called Prairie Records, and it looks and sounds like a record shop, and that's the exact motif and the concept that we've developed. So when you walk into our stores, it truly does look like a record shop.
Fantastic.
And it has rows and racks of LPs. This is records, so not licensed producers. And it's just like a record store would. But instead of finding your next favorite band or artist, what you're going to find is your next favorite brand or strain of cannabis. And so on all of our record covers, we have all the information that you would want to find on packaging that is not allowed under the regulatory environment. So right now, it's a very small brand element and a bunch of warning labels on your packaging. And so on our record covers, we have a relative intensity scale to highlight to the consumer whether it's high intensity, so high THC, or low, looks like a volume knob. The terpene profile, the brand.
This strain goes to 11 kind of
Exactly.
stuff, right?
The brand and the company that makes it are right up from the producer explaining their product, as well as the different formats and modalities.
It's such an interesting approach, right? Because that's it's an innovative solution to a real challenge at the retail.
Some of the key problems, or not problems, but challenges in the industry is that cannabis is very misunderstood as a product. And even the most knowledgeable people on cannabis will admit that there's so much science and research that is going to come out over the next several years, but the average consumer doesn't know the difference often between different terpenes, let alone indica and sativa. And so what we're trying to do is create an environment that, one, they feel comfortable being in, so the nostalgia of a record shop, and everybody does have a relationship in some way with music, and so creating a really comfortable environment to make them feel at ease, and then giving them a shopping experience that is differentiated. products in cannabis retail stores all have to be under lock and key because it has to be, locked up for inventory. Yeah. But in our store, what you're able to do is actually pick up a record, touch and feel it, have some sort of tactile experience.
It's like an interaction with the...
interaction, exactly. And we take that a next step where we do have Century jars with some of the flower product that we have. And beside that, we have headphones playing music that match the type of experience that they could expect.
Very clever.
When actually consuming that product. And so we all know that consumers are looking for experiences. They're looking to understand deeper the products that they're actually going to purchase. And so we try and bring all that together and be able to look at it, touch it, feel it, smell it, and actually listen to it at the same time.
Well, so now it's auspicious timing. I wanted a few minutes on your reflections on the year
Sure.
that's been, and then what lies ahead for the industry and for Westleaf and Prairie Records. How are you feeling now looking back over the past year?
It's been a crazy year. I think everybody in the cannabis industry would say that. 1 month feels like about a year in equivalence to any other industry. It's very fast-paced, and there's lots of change, right? And a lot of the change is dictated by regulation. However, I think the expectations probably weren't in line with, October 17, 2018 came and everybody expecting this tsunami of stores open and cannabis everywhere, and that didn't really happen. And we're still trying to catch up on the retail rollout in cannabis. You'll see Ontario, you see BC, how far behind they are. Yeah. Whereas then you have provinces like Alberta that has over 300 stores open, today. And so the retail rollout has been much slower. And I think everybody's feeling that as a retailer, as a producer, and getting, more consumers into retail stores.
And getting the right product on the shelf, not just any product that you can get
exactly.
on the shelf.
And so the supply chain issue has been solved somewhat, whereas there's lots of product available. Not always the product that you want, but there is product available, so there aren't empty store shelves. But I'm really excited about Cannabis 2.0 for a number of reasons. One, as a retailer, it's going to bring far more consumers into your store. It's going to compete with the black market when you have edibles and vapes and beverages that are widely available on the black market. And I think it's also going to help depress some of the wholesale prices on products that are available today, like dried cannabis and pre-rolls. Right. And so that's all good news for the retailer. And as a producer of the product, it's also going to bring more cannabis consumers into the category. So right now, depending on the data that you look at, between 15 to 30% of Canadians are actually consuming cannabis. Compared to alcohol, it's in the 80 to 85% range. And these new formats are really going to bring in the cannabis consumer, or the canna-curious, we'll call it, who's not interested in combusting plant material and who's interested in the effects of cannabis, but in a format that is more familiar to them.
Or a more friendly. They just, as you say, they're just not interested in smoking or whatever.
And thinking about how they can incorporate it into their lifestyle. So there's a lot of talk about beverages, which is a very small percentage of the overall category when you look at the United States. So in Colorado and California, it's about 1% of sales. I think it's going to be higher in Canada. I think that, as a retailer, we're actually, going to over-index a little bit compared to where some of the U.S. states are at on our mix, because we do believe that it is a product that is going to be very interesting to the consumer and is going to be very approachable for them. Obviously, having vapes and edibles and concentrates, those are the three main categories. Sure. And so your product mix it's not going to shift overnight, because nothing happens exactly overnight in this business. But what you're going to see is, these 2.0 products are going to take up anywhere between 50 and 60% of your product mix.
Wow.
And I think that's going to skew long-term even more, where more health-conscious and less people are willing to actually combust plant matter. And when they find the uses and the applications of these new formats, I think you're going to bring a lot more consumers into the category, and I think you're going to have consumers consuming more cannabis products as well.
Well, I think that you're set for success. I think everything's going in the right direction. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Great background, great place in the industry, and not your first time at a Retail Council of Canada event. So welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Telling a great story,
Thank you.
and thanks for spending time with the Voice of Retail.
Thanks for having me.
Avery, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm very good, Michael. Thank you.
Well, you and I have known each other for a bunch of years, but for the listeners at home, why don't you tell us a little bit about your personal, professional journey and what you do for Retail Council of Canada?
Sure. So I am currently a policy analyst with RCC. I work with primarily British Columbian provincial government, as well as the city of Vancouver and various other municipal governments. And then one of my big files over the past year and a half has been helping RCC members figure out the regulatory challenges surrounding the legalization of cannabis.
So an interesting file. So you're based here in Vancouver, handle a lot of files, like many in RCC do. You work along many dimensions, and then up comes retail cannabis. So I thought, what a great opportunity that we're together here at Retail West, at Retail Council of Canada, in the Atomic Reach podcasting studio to just chat about, I guess, the year that was and the year that will about to be in terms of recreational cannabis. And you've done a lot of work in the edible space particularly, but you really helped summarize across the country, not just in BC. When you think of the policy and you think of the work that we've done, your observations of the first year of retail cannabis.
I think kind of the catchphrase, if I were to sum it up, is slow and steady. I think both the federal government as well as all the provincial and territorial governments have really gone into this as, only, I believe it's the second country to legalize cannabis and by far the largest economy to legalize cannabis.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure on the Canadian government as well as the provinces and territories to do it right, and I do think that that's really been their focus, ensuring public safety, particularly public safety of children and young people, is a priority. And to that end, we have seen quite a strict regulatory regime, and I think that has perhaps disappointed some retailers. Just in order to be able to get into the retail cannabis sphere, there's quite a high barrier for entry, and I think that is frustrating for retailers. But again, I do see where the government's coming from, and see where their head is at in that sense.
I mean, it's a great conversation to have because you see the interaction with the government from a very different level, right? You see that they see risk, and they're going to wear that risk if something happens. So
exactly,
at the federal level, they would wear it in the election. It's not been an issue so far in this election at all, and at the provincial level, there's even more accountability. So you all handle a number of files, so it's interesting your perception around the risk. And I guess talking about risk, Cannabis 2.0, which is edibles, and another bigger array is about to be legalized or is now legalized. What work have you done to understand that regime and make tweaks or just actually interpret that for retailers?
Yeah, so I think the edible sphere, and when I say edibles, I'm kind of using shorthand. It would encompass the Cannabis 2.0, as you put it, would encompass edible products, so products that you drink or eat, as well as cannabis topical creams and ointments, as well as tinctures that are more commonly referred to as vaping products or products that go into vaping products. So it really does expand the sphere of products that will be made available to Canadians, which I think is really exciting. I think there's a lot of Canadians who are interested in the potential of cannabis but aren't necessarily looking to smoke something, to inhale something. Really that's been the only option other than having capsules and oils and that sort of thing.
Or turning to the legacy or black market.
Exactly,
right?
yeah. So I think that will open up a really exciting sphere for kind of newer cannabis consumers and also perhaps people who are coming back to it after sampling it in their youth and moving away from it for a few decades and kind of being curious about the new generation of cannabis products. So I think that, again, the edible landscape, I would say, is perhaps even more constrained, conservative than that for traditional cannabis products. I think that with the regulations that the federal government has put in place, they've really looked to, let's say, mistakes that could have been made by governments, particularly in the United States. So a few of the states who have legalized cannabis, Colorado, California.
And even at the beginning, right, they said, let's do this in two phases, not one. And that's fundamental. I think, I generally think that was a good decision. The industry struggled as a whole to just adapt, as did the regulators, really. They went from zero regulations to a pretty massive industry. So I think that the phasing, I think if we look back in the history books, would be seen as a successful decision or a good decision.
I would agree. I think it's better to go in and be cautious than go in guns a-blazing. And again, it's a new product. Because it's newly legal, there hasn't been a lot of official research into effects of different dosages. So that's another really great thing about legalization. That really opens up the door for a lot of research to be done.
And generally speaking, it's the case that for governments, along a whole bunch of files, it's easier to start stricter and then loosen the regulations than it is to start with looser regulations and then put in stricter regulations, because that's really disruptive for retailers, right? The retailers like consistency, operating in a predictable format. So it's tough. Okay, I got to operate within a very strict regime that can get better versus suddenly there's rules put upon you that really change operating models, right?
Exactly, yeah, that would change and potentially have you bringing back products that you once had available to the public.
Yeah.
So I think, we'll see. A lot of the regulations have been written with a fair amount of, I don't want to say leeway, but room for interpretation. Which, on one hand, causes a bit of frustration for producers and retailers who are looking for a clear answer on, what is legal, what they will be able to sell, what they will be able to produce. But on the other, as you mentioned, down the road could perhaps allow for a bit of a liberalization of the regime. I
was talking to Professor Sylvain Charlebois, and we were talking about edibles, and he brought up the point around Health Canada versus, food, the CFA,
right?
In terms of measuring and compliance, because really now you're in a food ingestible, which is kind of out in some ways of. Out of Health Canada and more in the traditional vein of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, right? CFIA. Yep. You corrected me there.
Sorry.
I said the CFA.
Did some regulatory work in that sphere as well, so I have the acronym ingrained in my memory.
No, it's where you live. So do you see a time, and I guess that opens up the conversation for CBD, which is far more defined in the U.S. with the Farming Act as available outside of just cannabis retail. Do you see any changes on a point in time where that regulatory regime might even be open to change?
I do. I think I know there's been some talk of consultation with Health Canada to move cannabis health products is the term they've chosen to use. Which I think I and many others would probably take as shorthand for CBD products, or at least products that contain primarily CBD, very low amounts of THC.
Right.
So I know they are, looking for information about that. As you've said, they have moved quite slowly so far, and I think they really want to have, they've now had a year with traditional cannabis products being legal. We're just going up to having edible cannabis products available for the first time. So if we're following that sort of year timeline, I think that could be reasonable.
You and I were talking again this time next year. We might be talking about that as 3.0.
Exactly. Yeah, we might be seeing, October 17th, 2020, having CBD products available, but who knows? We'll see.
Interesting. Well, thanks for bringing your perspective to the Voice of Retail. I guess we should wish each other happy Cannaversary, term I just heard.
Absolutely.
So happy Cannaversary. It's I think a regulatory milestone, right? I think kudos to the federal and provincial governments, more so in some ways to the federal for bringing it forward and making it happen and taking those what is bold steps, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one other really important thing to mention is right now legal cannabis, depending on the statistics shown, it's 16 to 20% of the total market in Canada. So just going back to what government's willing to do, I think if there's a few years where it's implemented in a consistent and safe way, they don't want to be missing out on 80% of the tax.
Of the tax base,
right, that, they'd be kind of foolish not to open up the sphere to retailers and see what retailers can do with it.
And then work with their provincial partners to do the same.
Exactly.
A very important piece, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Well, thanks again for sitting down and enjoy our time together, and look forward to reconnecting soon.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Michael.
Well, thanks to Eleanor, Adam, and Avery for being my guests this week in Vancouver. And now let's hit the highlights from Retail This Week e-newsletter, biggest retail weekly in Canada. You can subscribe to that on retailcouncil.org. So, not surprisingly, this being the Cannaversary week, so to speak, October 17th, 1 year after the 2018 legalization of recreational cannabis. Lots of cannabis stories. Not the only thing we're going to talk about, and certainly not the only retail story, but we kind of lead off with that. And the lead article from Canada.com, "This weed is so much better, cannabis legalization in BC at 1 year." So this is a focus on BC and actually quotes Eleanor Lynch, who you just heard from at the beginning of the podcast. They've got one store in Vancouver, a couple of stores in Saskatchewan. Again, you heard that in the podcast. Then she just shares in this article more around legalization 2.0. So a little more chitting and chatting about what we talked about in this Canada.com article. And don't forget, by the way, be sure and hear from cannabis retail leaders at the Retail Cannabis Forum, November 19th. That by Retail Council of Canada in Toronto. You can get more information and tickets on retailcouncil.org. I'll be there, brought to you by Environics Analytics, and I'll be podcasting live and doing some interviews, and I'll be on the main stage as well. So be sure and check that out if you're in the Toronto area. It's a great half-day event. The morning is the Brick and Mortar Forum, but the morning or the afternoon is the Retail Cannabis Forum. So always lots of stuff to talk about. As I said, not the only thing in retail this week to talk about. Harry Rosen launches, first of its kind, this from the Retail Insider, Canada Goose Shop and Shop. So Shop and Store, actually, it's referred to by Craig Patterson, Retail Insider. He talks about this fantastic. There's lots of pictures in Retail Insider, and if you're in Toronto, be sure and visit it on the Bloor Street store. It looks fantastic. I'm going to stop by myself. Congratulations to Larry and the team. It looks fantastic and very clearly a very important brand for Harry Rosen. Montreal wants to bar grocery stores from throwing food in trash. So there's no question, as Marc Fortin says here in the article, no one wants food waste. So it's all around figuring out how to continue to optimize. Because in fact, actually, the food bank receives from Provigo, IGA, Metro grocery stores already. They're receiving 1 million kilograms of food, including meat. So more work to be done in that file, as we would say. And by the way, hear from top retailers and grocers live on the stage in Montreal at DTLQC, the Retail Council of Canada event on November 5th. I'll be there. Again, I'll be there podcasting such great events and such great opportunity to chit-chat, folks. Actually, I have an interview scheduled next week with Ron Johnson, who will be kicking off the main session. But if all goes well, I'll be chatting with Ron next week, and that'll be on the podcast very soon. In other news from BNN, Aritzia's Q2 net income up 19%. Good for Aritzia. It continues to pull strong numbers. So good news for them, of course. What else? Let's see. Okay, the Golden Pencil Awards. Golden Pencil Awards are part of Canadian Grocer. Those are happening November 19th. So be sure and check those out. That's we're doing a little partnership with those folks just to promote that. Retail around the world. Emily Weiss's Glossier grew from millennial catnip to billion-dollar juggernaut. This is Vanity Fair. It's a very long, very detailed article. It's a really goes deep into the background. You know, they're now $1.2 billion valuation from that would be 5 years ago. Startup beauty. It's described here as a beauty startup for the ages. So do check that article out because it's really fascinating exploration of Glossier. And if you don't somehow, you may not know the brand, but it's a great article. From CNBC, Hudson Yards, seen as a trial for the mall of the future. Here's how it's going so far. So Hudson Yards, I predicted at the beginning of the year I'd be talking about Hudson Yards all year, and sure enough, here it is again. So kind of about 8 months in, it's the first major shopping mall in New York, just off the Hudson, and it's apparently, doing pretty well so far. I guess 50% of the traffic is coming from New Yorkers and 50% from visitors to New York. I'm going to go check it out myself, and it might just be on the tour. I'm once again leading the tour in January. If you're a retail member of Retail Council of Canada, heading down to the NRF Big Show, I'll be there on the Sunday leading a tour of interesting retail around Manhattan. And then in Monday, Tuesday, I'll be actually in the NRF's host podcast studio. I've got some space they've given me in that studio to do some podcasting. So it'll be a busy couple of days for all of us. Next article from Forbes, the American Dream Mall We've been hearing about this American Dream Mall for a long, long time. It's in East Rutherford, New Jersey. October 25th, after $5 billion, that's with a B, of investment, 2 bankruptcies along the way, the first stage will open. So what does $5 billion buy? Apparently quite a lot. So a good article there from Forbes. From CNBC back to CNBC, how Abercrombie & Fitch ditched its past to try and bring back customers. That's an interesting profile article. I included it because if you compare it to someone like Forever 21, and, broadly speaking, kind of, sort of, they're in the same category, certain both in fashion apparel, Forever 21 being a little more fast fashion than Abercrombie & Fitch. But it really tells a more interesting brand story about how to try to make your brand more contemporary and change the brand. So do check that out. From Vox, Jason Del Rey once again hit the nail on the head with an interesting story on how Amazon's new weapon to crush the competition, $1 items delivered for free by tomorrow. So, Amazon continued to drive really hard into delivery. They now have a flood of low-priced items. This is in the U.S. $2 roll of dental floss or a 75-cent makeup brush available to Prime customers, free one-day shipping. Unbelievable. Turning unit economics on its head. There's some who said if you think your unit economics moat is going to protect you from Amazon, they've just proven that may be more difficult than everyone thought, but we'll see how that works out. News for independent retailers. Actually, we kick it off with something from in the cannabis file again. Cannabis independents watch the rise of change in Saskatchewan. So there's a great interview here with the owner of Living Skies Cannabis, a woman who's a great entrepreneur, and talking about how, notwithstanding winning the lottery, they had a lottery in Saskatchewan too. She had no intention of giving it up. She had no plans on selling the license. She's a 24-year-old entrepreneur. It's a great story from the Star Phoenix. From Style Democracy, Toronto's favorite beauty store. Pretty bold statement. Fresh Roots, located in Rosedale, is kind of branching out and being very successful. Congratulations to them. And then back to cannabis. The Vancouver Courier, cannabis retailers battle regulations and the black market. This is an exploration and another bit of a deep dive into BC. Very slow start in BC. I can tell you some great cannabis stores, but for a province that was really and has a very strong both market and it also has a very strong growing community. It's interesting that they have not jumped off the page and they've moved fairly slowly. But Avery talked about that and how actually that regime is quite conservative. So it's going to be hard to push that government too fast, too far. But anyway, good article there from the Vancouver.com. Vancouver Courier. Last spotlight on digital retail. What have we got? Oh, this is interesting. There's always Amazon stories in my podcast. Jeff Bezos' master plan. This from The Atlantic, and again, another long form piece of journalism. Really dives into Bezos and when we think about Amazon, I always talk about it as 3 things, the retail, the AWS, and the advertising. But I forget, they're trying to also build a rocket ship to the moon to take people to the moon. And, it's just an interesting article about him. And it really gets you thinking about how much of that company is driven by one individual and in all the dimensions that it's being taken. So great article from The Atlantic. Do check it out. From Progressive Grocery, last but not least, 2019 Retailer of the Year, Walmart. So that's interesting because, in the U.S., Walmart is the number 1 share, owns the category. I think it's 25%. It's a fairly fragmented market in the States. They own 25% of the grocery market and really have continued to step up. And in fact, this week are launching their in-home delivery of groceries. What's different about that? Well, it's not actually delivered to the home. It's actually delivered and put in the refrigerator. So the Walmart associates wear body cams, not unlike police, and you can see what they're doing. And the associates have at least a year of service, and customers are notified. I talk about this in some of my presentations. You get a text, you follow the cam of the Walmart associate putting groceries right into your refrigerator. So talk about full service. It's another play by Mark Laurie, the vice president of e-commerce for Walmart. So we'll see how that plays out. Amazon tried to do a pilot of that apparently in Washington, and that didn't go quite as well, but it wasn't quite, it was just put it inside the door. So anyway, these are all just last mile solutions, so pretty innovative. And let's see how Walmart can continue to compete against Amazon on fresh and frozen. We talked about that in a prior episode, Mark Laurie's strategy to compete on fresh and frozen, where Amazon is actually not very strong. Well, that's a wrap on this edition of The Voice of Retail. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. Please rate and review and be sure and recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of M.E. LeBlanc Company, Inc. You can learn more about me on www.meleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a great week.